So here's a question. Is it easy to be present? Are there situations where you find it difficult to be present? Simon?
Yeah, I think nowadays for me it's a little bit easier, right, to be present, because the way I look at what present means is just being my being authentic. I think the book says the try to be the authentic best self. I just find that maybe I'm older now, and being able to respond to situations or engage in situations a little bit easier. And so I would say, yeah, I mean, it's easier for me to be present. And the second part of the question is, are there situations that's difficult to be present? I'm sure, yes, there's definitely will be. And I was trying to think like what kind of situations that will make me a little bit challenging, right, to be present. I would say is when I'm getting into something that I'm less familiar with, something that is new to me. I guess in one situation that I can remember is it was the first time kind of chairing a volunteer. I was on the volunteer board, and I was trying to chair that the first time, and there were a lot of people there, right? In the from the city where I am living in, and they were all there. And when I stood up there trying to do my introductions and so on, and I looked up and looked at them, and I said, "Oh wow, all those all those powerful people there." And for that few seconds, I remember is like I just not myself, you know, and but then of course after doing it a few more times, you kind of get the hang of it, right? You get a little bit easier. But I'm sure I will run into new situations or unfamiliar situations that I will freeze up again. How about you guys? Any other examples?
I think that being present requires us not to be in ego. So, when we're in ego, we tend to over reflect, we tend to judge ourselves, and we tend to judge our experience, which takes us away from being present, as Amy Cuddy describes being present. So I think that, and she does describe presence as being a state, not a trait. Which is interesting. And this is always going to shift and change. And it certainly, from my experience, shifts and change. I have developed a mindfulness meditation practice daily. And that practice is in order for me to sort of cultivate my present, to be present for myself, be present in my experience, and to show up for others. But it's tough. And I think I come back to that sense of realigning, restoring myself to center, because we tend to go off center, right? We tend to either live in the past or lurch into the future, or sort of mull and ruminate about things, and being caught up in our to-do list that takes us away from being present. And I think for me, and I think for most folks, it becomes really challenging to be present in the difficult. Sitting with the discomfort is tough. To stay in your center, to stay in that sense of what Amy Cuddy calls your personal power, your strength, your integrity, your courage, is tough when either you're experiencing something challenging or you're bearing witness to someone who is experiencing something challenging. So I think for me, it's this both and approach. Being in and out of presence, your practice can make it certainly easier to be present, but also we're also going to experience those tough moments, that perhaps this is what it's all about, right? This practicing presence is cultivating a sense of being with ourselves and our experience in a way that we can ride with the wave of the challenges.
Yeah, very good points, Anjannette, and you as well, Simon. They're just very good points. I mean, clearly, I mean, we all have the ability to sort of turn on and turn off our ability to be there or to be engaged in a situation. I sometimes, I 100% sometimes find myself not necessarily being 100% present, clearly when I'm uncomfortable. And like, so say for instance, or specifically in a social setting or a social situation where you're unfamiliar, when you're just in 100% unfamiliar surroundings, or you're not in a comfortable surrounding where you know people, right? I notice that there are sometimes, if you don't know or have a personal connection with a lot of the individuals in your immediate vicinity, you can sometimes clam up a little bit. And not necessarily be your true and authentic self, just because you're just not in a friendly environment, or you're in an environment that could potentially be adverse to you, right? So if you're not in a good place and you're uncomfortable, right, then you're not fully going to be your best self. Now, the key in all of this is when you do find yourself in an uncomfortable situation, having the power and having the ability to, where instead of being a 0, maybe you bump it up to a 3 or 4 from a presence perspective. So being able to not necessarily clam up in a difficult situation, but show certain pieces or certain components of your personality in order to be more present in these situations is in my mind the technique, right? What you really want to be able to do. So in that difficult meeting with execs, being able to speak up, get your point of view across, and be able to do so in a way that you're clear, you're coherent, and you're impressive, right? And oftentimes in those types of environments and in those types of situations, you think to yourself, oh, I've got to be able to deliver, a multitude of key points in order to stand up in this environment. But oftentimes it's quality over quantity, right? You don't necessarily have to be extremely active, but you just need to be active at the right times. And then of course, pivot towards your strength. So if you're in a meeting, or if you're in a situation to where you're not necessarily 100% comfortable and you would normally clam up, look for moments where you have an opportunity to speak to something that you're familiar with, or that you're an expert in, because that will then give you an opportunity to be present in that moment and also be impressive to the participants and other people around in that audience. So that's my thought there.
That's a very interesting point, because in a networking situation, I used to clamp up, like you said. I have no idea how to even approach the people there, but then again, you don't need to be do something that you are not comfortable with, right? Because that kind of goes against what present is, right? Is to be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I was doing more recently is just kind of walk around the room, right? And find the topic or the discussion that I like. And then I can then obviously join in. And then if I'm hearing something that I have no idea what they're talking about, you just move on. You don't have to force yourself into that conversation, or into all conversations, right? So.
And I think that this idea of being your authentic is equated to your best self. So your authentic self is your best self. Can be also a very difficult idea to sort of wrap. It was a difficult idea for me to wrap my head and embodied response around, because those niggling feelings in you that of that doesn't feel the most confident, that might not feel the strongest, also belongs as well in my interpretation of presence. And perhaps, Amy Cuddy, because this book was written in order to be expansive, in order to feel into your power, to be and to show up in a way, in a business setting and in personal settings where you could have influence, that's written in a very specific way. But how I see being present and being your authentic self is also to accept those parts of you that are a little bit more shadowy, right? That self-doubt, the moments that you don't feel the strongest, but that too is your authentic self. That too belongs, that you belong in that moment, and that those feelings are valid. Perhaps if we add curiosity around that, we might discover the why to it. So one of the things that for me is missing from this book are that those feelings as well belong and are welcomed in the space of who you are and your experience. That perhaps power posing your way out of it, you might be missing out on that investigation of a part of yourself that you need to be uncomfortable with, that you might need to dismantle, that you might need to become curious and start to unknot a bit in order to become, your true self, which might not look like powerful and big, but might be something else. So that's just one of the things that came up for me in this conversation about being expansive and big and powerful in your own sense of who you are.